yeah, that's the first show. It's a show without an identity. It's a show that's clearly like just bizarrely thrown together without any clear like indication of what it's really meant to achieve. Like what's pushing the Dupps meant to do? What's pushing the Johnsons meant to do? Other than people in the writers' room find that nonsense funny, and it's sad and desperately pandering to an audience that they didn't even get in the door. That's the thing. It's like, with the freaking lingerie battle royal and the racists and the homophobic stuff. Not that you'd understand it, but like if you were pandering to an audience, you'd be like, oh well, they're doing something there. They didn't even do that. They're debasing themselves and being like just bottom of the barrel entertainment for the sake of absolutely no return whatsoever, and that's really a sad sight to see.
I don't know. It's definitely a weird dated show, but a show that like you could put on with your friends and go, haha, look at this show. I had a good time watching it with my friend Garrett, but I don't know if I would. I don't know if like at the time watching it I would have gone, well, I'm excited for NWA-TNA pay-per-view number 2.
It's weird because a lot of the ratings in the time were like 5s out of 10s and 6 out of 10s, which I would have said are way too high, and people being far too optimistic based on like this 2 hours of entertainment. But like, it's 2002. Who am I to know what the wrestling mind space was like then? Which brings us to the second show, which like was the first show with all the bad stuff and much less of the good stuff.
This show, like aesthetically, as I was watching, I was like, this is WCW.
Yeah,
this is what it reminded me of. I was like, I felt like I was watching 2000s WCW right there.
And like, it's very clear that was the intent. They were trying to be the replacement for WCW in the market. They were running old WCW markets. They even had a WCW ring, like the literal ring was a WCW ring. So like a lot of the small things in that era were directly catered to the people who had stopped watching wrestling after WCW had died, which it's actually fascinating to think that that's the thing we're kind of still doing. We're still like pandering to the old WCW fan 20 years later. But even then, a year later, they were still like, this is designed for the people who liked WCW. But like WCW is a very broad spectrum of things. The old era of like the Flair and Steamboat and WCW, which is like these big iconic main events and these big matches. Then there's like the weird era between that. There's the Hulk Hogan era, there's the Nitro era, there's the NWO era, then there's the kind of Death era, which honestly TNA more than anything is based on the Death era. But
That's what I meant. Like, that specifically was the era of WCW that this reminded me of.
Where everything is terrible except some occasionally good cruiserweight matches, which is basically the TNA identity. But yeah, I don't even think they did a good job of like finding that WCW audience.
Obviously not, otherwise they would have had an audience.
Yeah, because like when you read like their expectations, like they wanted this show to like tour every 2 weeks in different markets. Huntsville was the first one. They did like 400 people paid. And I think that Nashville was the second. They were doing to the municipal auditorium, where they then started considering Nashville as a home base, which eventually they would do. But like they considered this a touring brand before it utterly flopped as a touring brand. And like, what were they thinking people would come out for? I just don't understand it, because they didn't even announce, like, Scott Hall and Jeff Jarrett would be a match that would probably get people in the building. But because it was set up in the first show for the second show, they couldn't announce it, so people wouldn't show up.
Hey, you know what they could have announced that for? The first show, if they did Dan Severn versus Ken Shamrock in the main event.
Yeah. You could have had Scott Hall and Jarrett. You could have had some good singles matches, some meaty stuff to sink your teeth into.
But no. I guess they were right when they were burying the gauntlet for the gold the whole way through the first show. It really ruined the first show.
Maybe they were right. Like James Storm making his debut as like Cowboy Man, who would go on to become the man who had more matches in TNA history than anybody else. The only wrestler to have more than 1,000 matches in TNA history, James Storm. Debuts losing to the men in the penis costumes. In the same way that AJ Styles debuted losing to the men in the Elvis costume.
I was going to say, if they weren't wearing the penis costumes, it'd be forgivable too. Like, if they were just dudes.
Yeah, if they were just these two big, beefy dudes, as I said, who did suplexes, look cool, or throwing people around, it would be like, oh yeah, those guys. That's cool. You should push those guys.
You should have just had them come in as the NWA Tag Champions. Why wouldn't you use that to your advantage?
They clearly just wanted to stamp their own identity on all these things.
Yeah, their own identity sucks.
That's very, very true. But it's not even that sucks. It just doesn't really exist. It's like a weird hodgepodge of Attitude Era tropes that don't add up.